What if the most shocking royal statement of the decade wasn't whispered behind palace walls, but said out loud, without apology, without permission, and without fear? I am the queen now. Let that sink in for a moment. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Not future queen, not symbolic queen, not a joke, not a metaphor. Those words, or at least the message behind them, detonated across the internet like a controlled explosion. People froze mid-scroll. Comment sections erupted. Supporters cheered. Critics laughed. Others felt something colder. Unease. Because this didn't sound like rebellion anymore. It sounded like a claim. And here's the unsettling part. It didn't come from Buckingham Palace. It didn't come from Parliament. It didn't come from bloodline, coronation, or crown jewels. It came from Meghan Markle. Now pause for a second and ask yourself honestly. How many times have we heard royal controversies before? Interviews, memoirs, leaks, carefully worded accusations, emotional appeals, all of it familiar, all of it expected, all of it safely framed as grievance. But this moment felt different. This wasn't about pain. This wasn't about healing. This wasn't even about revenge. This was about power. And power, once claimed openly, changes everything. The internet tried to decide what it was seeing. Was it sarcasm? Was it branding? Was it delusion? Or was it something far more calculated? The final evolution of a strategy years in the making? Because here's the contradiction that no one wants to confront. You don't declare yourself something unless, somewhere deep down, you believe you already are. So how did we get here? How does someone go from outsider to exile to confidently implying supremacy over an institution that has survived wars, scandals, and centuries of internal collapse? More importantly, why now? Why say this at a moment when the royal family appears fragile, divided, cautious, almost defensive? Why project dominance when silence might have been safer? Some say it was a slip. Others insist it was marketing bravado. But listen closely to the tone, the timing, the posture. This didn't sound impulsive. It sounded rehearsed, not in words, but in mindset. Think about it. Royal power used to come from blood, then from tradition, then from public reverence. But today? Today it comes from attention, narrative control, influence, the ability to command belief without asking permission. And if that's the new crown, who really wears it? This is why this story matters now. Not because of the words alone, but because of what they reveal. A shift, a challenge, a line drawn in public that cannot easily be erased. Because once someone stops asking to be acknowledged and starts declaring themselves ruler, they're no longer playing defense. They're making a move. And the most dangerous part? This declaration wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the signal. Because long before anyone heard those words, something else was already happening quietly, strategically, and deliberately behind the scenes. And once you see what led to this moment, the phrase, "I am the queen now," stops sounding outrageous and starts sounding inevitable. This didn't start with a microphone. It didn't start with a headline. And it definitely didn't start with those words. It started years earlier, in moments so subtle most people miss them entirely. Ask yourself this: when did the language change? At first, the story was simple. A woman enters an ancient institution and feels rejected, isolated, unprotected. That narrative was familiar, even sympathetic. People understood it. Many related to it. And for a long time, that framing worked. But then something shifted. Listen closely to the way the message evolved. The tone hardened. The posture straightened. Victimhood slowly gave way to certainty. Not, "I was wronged," but "I deserved more." Not, "They failed me," but "They couldn't handle me." That's not healing language. That's positioning language. Here's the surprising part. The more distance grew between Meghan and the monarchy, the more confidently she spoke about it. As if separation didn't weaken her claim, it strengthened it. Think about that contradiction for a second. Most people lose authority when they leave a system. Former employees, former insiders, former royals, their voices fade. Their relevance shrinks. But in this case, the opposite happened. Every interview felt less like an explanation and more like a lecture. Every appearance less like a response and more like a declaration. The message subtly transformed from "this happened to me" into "this is how it really works." And people listened. Supporters didn't just defend her, they elevated her. Critics didn't just argue, they amplified her. Every reaction fed the same machine, attention, legitimacy, presence. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Power no longer lives solely in palaces. It lives in perception, and perception is shaped by repetition. Narrative, confidence. Say something often enough, boldly enough, without flinching, and eventually people stop asking whether you're allowed to say it. They start asking whether it's true. Look back at the imagery, the settings, the symbolism, carefully chosen backdrops, controlled lighting, regal posture without regal permission. None of it accidental. This wasn't rebellion. It was rehearsal. And the audience? We were unknowingly being trained, conditioned, nudged to accept a new hierarchy, one built not on ancestry, but on assertion. So when those words finally surfaced, "I am the queen now," they didn't arrive out of nowhere. They landed on groundwork that had already been laid. Which raises a chilling question. If this was the making of the claim, who exactly underestimated her? Because somewhere along the way, someone inside the royal orbit assumed silence would diminish her. That distance would weaken her. That time would make her irrelevant. They were wrong. And that miscalculation didn't just embolden her. It set the stage for something far bigger. Because once you believe you hold the crown, the next step isn't asking for recognition. It's ruling. And what happened when that belief met resistance is where this story truly turns dark. No coronation, no oath, no blessing. And yet the confidence was absolute. Here's the question no one wanted to ask out loud. How do you claim a throne without asking anyone's permission? The answer is unsettlingly simple. You redefine what the throne is. For centuries, royal authority came from lineage, bloodlines, rituals performed behind closed doors and guarded by tradition. But in the modern age, something quietly replaced that formula. Influence, visibility, narrative dominance, the ability to decide what millions of people believe before breakfast. And this is where the story takes a sharper turn. Because Meghan wasn't trying to sit on the old throne. She was building a new one, right in front of everyone, while insisting the old one no longer mattered. Think about the contradiction. The monarchy depends on silence, restraint, and distance. Meghan's power model thrived on visibility, repetition, and emotional immediacy. Two systems, two rules, completely incompatible. So when she stepped away, she didn't retreat. She switched arenas. Every appearance became a stage. Every interview a decree. Every carefully framed message another brick in a structure that didn't look like a palace, but functioned like one. Ask yourself honestly, how many people today feel more emotionally connected to a personality than to an institution? That's not an accident. That's leverage. And here's the irony that makes this moment so dangerous. The royal family stayed quiet, believing dignity would protect them. Meanwhile, silence created a vacuum. And vacuums always get filled. Supporters began to say things out loud that she didn't have to. Critics unintentionally spread her message further. Algorithms rewarded outrage. Headlines blurred the line between challenge and legitimacy. Soon, something strange happened. People stopped debating whether she could say it. They started debating whether she was right. And once that shift happens, authority begins to move. Not officially, but psychologically. The crown becomes symbolic, and symbolism is fragile. But here's where the story gets even more uncomfortable. Behind the scenes, there were attempts to slow this momentum. Private responses, quiet objections, subtle signals meant to remind her of boundaries that had existed for generations. Those signals were ignored. Worse, they may have backfired. Because resistance didn't cause retreat. It caused defiance. And defiance, when paired with belief, hardens into conviction. This is why the phrase, "I am the queen now," wasn't just provocative. It was revealing. It exposed a worldview where legitimacy isn't granted, it's seized. Where power isn't inherited, it's claimed. And where permission is irrelevant. But here's the part no one saw coming. The moment that confidence crossed a line so visible, so irreversible, that even her most loyal supporters hesitated. Because once you stop implying power and start declaring it, you force everyone else to respond. And what that response would be, or whether it would come at all, is where this story takes its most dramatic turn. Every empire falls the moment it believes it cannot. That line sounds dramatic, but history proves it again and again. The danger isn't rebellion. The danger is certainty. And the moment this declaration landed, certainty became the problem. Here's the uncomfortable truth no one wanted to confront. Saying, "I am the queen now," wasn't just bold. It was irreversible. Up until that moment, everything could still be explained away. Framed as branding, misinterpreted tone, media exaggeration, strategic ambiguity. There was still room to walk things back, to soften edges, to reframe intention. But once the line was crossed publicly, the game changed. Because power that hints can be negotiated. Power that declares demands a response. Watch what happened next. The reaction fractured instantly. Supporters rushed to reinterpret. She didn't mean it literally. It's symbolic. It's about inner power. But notice something strange. None of those explanations came from her. They came from people trying to protect the moment from its own weight. Critics, on the other hand, sensed blood in the water. Not because the claim was outrageous, but because it was too confident, too clean, too calm. There was no nervous laughter, no backtracking, no clarifying statement. Silence. And silence after a declaration isn't humility. It's posture. Ask yourself this. When someone says something truly accidental, what do they do next? They explain. When someone says something intentional, they wait. That's when the unease really set in. Because now the spotlight wasn't on her. It was on everyone else. The palace, the media, the public. Silence from the other side started to feel less like dignity and more like hesitation. And hesitation is dangerous. Behind closed doors, conversations shifted. Not publicly, of course, but insiders began to worry about something far more threatening than a headline. Precedent. Because if one person can claim symbolic authority loudly enough, long enough, and without consequence, what stops others from doing the same? This wasn't about one statement anymore. It was about what happens when tradition meets modern power and blinks. Here's the contradiction that terrified both sides. If the royal institution responded directly, it risked legitimizing the claim. If it stayed silent, it risked letting the claim breathe. Either move carried consequence. Meanwhile, the narrative machine kept moving. Clips replayed, words analyzed, tone dissected, and with every cycle, the idea became more familiar, less shocking, more normalized. That's how lines disappear. Not all at once, but through repetition. And this is where the point of no return quietly arrived. Because whether intended or not, a message had been sent. Authority no longer requires approval. And once people believe that, they stop waiting to be crowned. They start crowning themselves. The doors were closing now, not just behind her, but behind everyone involved. Whatever came next wouldn't be undone by statements or spin. Because when a claim like that enters the world, it doesn't fade. It forces a reckoning. And what happened next? The private reaction, the quiet decision, the moment that changed the trajectory entirely, never reached the headlines the way it should have. But it's the key to understanding how this story truly ends. The conclusion begins now. So what did those words really mean? I am the queen now. By the time we reach this point in the story, it's clear this was never about a crown, a throne, or a palace balcony. It was about something far more modern and far more dangerous. Control of belief. Because here's the truth most people avoid. Power today doesn't belong to those who inherit it. It belongs to those who convince others to accept it. Loudly, repeatedly, confidently. Look back at the opening question. Was this arrogance? Was it delusion? Or was it a declaration of a new kind of authority, one built not on bloodlines, but on visibility and narrative dominance? The answer is uncomfortable. It was all of it. This moment forced the world to confront a reality we rarely like to admit. Institutions feel permanent until they aren't. Symbols feel untouchable until someone touches them without consequence. And once that happens, the spell is broken. The monarchy didn't collapse here, but something cracked. Because silence, once used as strength, began to look like uncertainty. And spectacle, once dismissed as noise, began to look like influence. And here's the emotional reckoning no one expected. Claiming a crown alone is isolating. There's no council, no coronation cheers, no loyal silence behind the walls. Just an audience that can turn at any moment. Support built on attention can evaporate faster than it forms. Power taken without permission demands constant performance. And that is the cost. Because when authority is self-declared, it must be defended every single day. Every post, every interview, every appearance. There's no resting place. No inherited legitimacy to fall back on. Only momentum. Which brings us full circle. This story was never about whether someone could become queen in the traditional sense. It was about whether the world would accept a new definition of what ruling even means. And that question is still unanswered. So now it's your turn. Do you believe power is something you're born into, or something you seize? Does authority require permission, or just belief? And when someone declares themselves ruler without asking, do we laugh, resist, or slowly accept it? Because one thing is certain. Once the words were spoken, they couldn't be taken back. And whether you see them as ambition, warning, or illusion, the consequences are already unfolding. If you want to understand where this leads next, and why the fallout may be far more personal than political, stay here, share your thoughts, and watch closely. Because in this story, the crown may be invisible, but the reckoning will not be.